Welcome to Releasing Trauma, a Survivor's Podcast. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. I am a survivor of emotional bullying, rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, and grief. After losing my husband in 2019, I set off on a new adventure to help other women release their trauma and create a life they can cherish. Each week, I will feature a guest expert or a survivor to share their stories, tips, wisdom, and more. The goal is so that you can take away even just the smallest nugget of information you can use in your life right now to make a change, and to remind you that you're not alone. There is life after trauma, and you can move from victim to thriver and create a life you can cherish. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the show. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. With me today is Juliana Leamen. We are going to talk about how to find confidence from within after 40. And me being almost 50, I can guarantee you that that is a tough one, let me tell you. So, Juliana, thank you so much for coming to the show.
It is my pleasure, Tracy. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I always start off the show with having our guests tell us a little bit about their story. So why don't you tell us your story and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, sounds good. So I now live in Canada near Toronto, but I was born and raised in Brazil. And I stayed in Brazil until I was 21 years old. So I would say that my forming years took place back home. And a lot of the lifestyle back home and a lot of the, call it, dangers and uncertainties of, life in a very dangerous country, I think are huge contributors to my story and why I do what I do today. So I'll just give you a quick little glimpse of what that looks like. And I think it took me years, even, I've been in the science field for over 10 years now. And over the last 10 years, I was able to really pinpoint what were those initial early, childhood traumas and triggers that I experienced and how it kind of even guided my career today. And I was able, with the help of other practitioners, pinpoint that I grew up in a place, I had a great family, a great childhood, but I grew up in a very dangerous part of Brazil, metropolitan area where a lot of businesses are located and very crowded. And a big part of that story comes down to the fact that as a child, I never felt safe. And you're talking about even inside your home, not just putting yourself in dangerous situations, inside your home and your schools and things like that. And with that, my body became really, really good at producing cortisol, the stress hormone. And it was almost like I was always in survival mode, even, in bed, falling asleep at night, by hearing things outside and so on. This is not just my story. I think it's a lot of the people that grew up in those dangerous countries' story as well. And with that, my body became incredibly good at being in survival, in stress and alert mode. And when I was down there, I didn't know because I didn't know any better. And that was an everyday thing. But when I moved to Canada when I was 21 years old, and all of a sudden I was no longer in constant danger. I was no longer in a situation that required me to be in alert all the time. I started to contemplate what some other professionals call a cortisol gap, that my body was now, in this deficit of no longer being in this incredibly stressful and scary place every day. So I really found other ways through, self-imposed stress and career stress and so on, to almost feeling control of my body and compensate for that, which I believe was very much the trigger for a lot of my health struggles. And I have a laundry list of them. And really the discovery of how important our hormones are and how much control we can actually get back in our hands when it comes to hormones. And my career really sort of took off from my own health histories and discoveries of how stress, in my case, from living in Brazil, but how stress really impacted my health, my well-being, but also everything that related to my weight, my confidence, how I looked at myself, and just my overall health status. So that's kind of a little bit of a quick version of where it all kind of came from. But it took me many years to be able to pinpoint that that was the root cause of a lot of those sort of hormonal imbalances that I experienced.
Well, I think that a lot of us as trauma survivors do have that um, where we're producing far too much cortisol because we're
Yeah,
still in fight or flight mode. Um, we're just still waiting for something to happen, So it
exactly.
our bodies are just constantly producing that cortisol, which then, of course, like leads to weight gain and loss of confidence. So we're going to talk about that.
Yes. And what I really noticed too with the cortisol sort of
Mhm.
ups and downs, like I even, I tested myself several times and I could very easily see, and I see that too in other clients that have a history of trauma, a similar pattern in the curves that I had. And what was a bit surprising to me is that that curve of cortisol was still, let's just say, a little out of balance, even after the 10 years that I spent working on it and improving it. And it would have been wonderful if I had had the opportunity to test it 15 years ago to compare. But I am pretty sure that it would have been a pretty scary picture, like from a hormonal standpoint, looking at it before. But I think it wasn't until I had the contrast, right, of no longer being in the constant situation of danger, to recognize that even though I wasn't there, very much like you said, I was still looking for it. I was still protecting myself from it,
Mhm.
even though physically that wasn't the reality anymore. Right. And I think it is that constant. And I'll give you a bit of a personal example, but as last year, as soon as, the whole COVID thing broke and the news came and we were doing the very first grocery shopping trip, my husband and I, since all the, news were more like known by the people, I remember, Tracy, like the way I felt. I said to my husband, like, I felt like in the car driving to the grocery store. And this is when the shelves are empty and the shortages were starting, the whole thing.
Right.
I went right back to my, I don't know, childhood self. And I was in such panic. It wasn't so much a panic attack, but it was almost like I felt it rushing through my body, what it felt like. And I said to my husband, which is a very calm Canadian, the opposite of me, I said to him, it may not make sense to you, but for this one trip, I need to be in full control of what we do. And whatever I tell you, we're going to buy it, let's just buy it. Like, don't question me, because I was in such a different mode. It was almost like I was operating back into my survival self. And that was incredible because the amount of adrenaline rushing through my body, just in my mind, the perception before we even got to the store. And it really reminded me, wow, this is how far I've come, because I used to feel this almost every day and that was normal, right? So having that contrast again was a good reminder that yes, even though my cortisol curve is still a little elevated compared to others, it is much improved, and there's a lot you can do to improve once you start kind of like uncovering some of those triggers for you.
So how did you stop? How are you able to um, break the cortisol cycle?
Yeah. So I did, like, over the years, work with other experts. So it's a bit of a combination, like tools from different sources, I would say, right? But in terms of the most impactful ones, like I really had somebody that helped me work on the fear and really on the root cause of the trauma. And the end goal of the work we did was really to neutralize my perception of the traumas. It wasn't so much to make what happened right or wrong, or even to attempt to change or forget it. It was a lot more about neutralizing how I perceived it, because it was really my perception of what had happened or not happened that really was, in my case, what was propagating how I felt. So I did a lot of, self work on what does feeling safe mean to me? What are the true people I can count on that are my supporters? What did I perceive as danger and how does it relate to here? And one of my more recent mentors, he says something that really touched my heart. And he said that there's nothing that the body can endure that the soul can't transcend. And that was like so profound to me. And he says that anything that happens to us that we are not able to find transcendental gratitude for becomes our baggage. And I've always felt, because one of the major, health issues that I have has to do with my spine. I had spinal surgery and, inability to move several times in my life. And for me, it was almost like I was carrying this heavy backpack, if that makes sense. And it was really working with him more recently in the last few years that I was able to develop more actual tools and strategies to feel I was in control of neutralizing perceptions. And I was a lot more in control with my own toolbox of getting those perceptions shifted so I could actually get to a place of acceptance of what happened without the need to wish it was different or hoping to change it. And I can tell you from even my ability to, manage pain, or even how much pain I feel in my body nowadays and stress levels, that it is night and day. And it was all mindset based more than physical. I've done, of course, physical treatments as well for my spine, but I think the root cause of everything that I was feeling was very much deep rooted in my subconscious mind. And he has really helped me sort of bring some of that stuff to the forefront so I could actually neutralize it.
Okay. So dealing with the traumas for sure is number one. Yeah.
Yeah,
We have to, I can see that. We have to let go of our past in order to live in the present.
exactly. And like for me, for a long time, I actually didn't want to go back to the country to visit the rest of the family. Like I wasn't able for many years to just deal with it, because anytime I would go, and I'd probably been back like 4 times in 15 years, which is not a lot. And that was like weddings and baby showers. It was like, can't miss that specific experience. That's the only reason. And anytime that I do go back, I still have so much fear. And other family members, for some reason, don't feel this way like I do. But for me, it is something so profound. And so what I've done for a long time is avoid, right? Not going in there. But what I was able to work on is really my perception of the fear that I brought with me to Canada, that I still, like I mentioned earlier, live with every day. And it is my intention to, because I cannot deny that it is dangerous in Brazil. Like if I go back, I understand that I am putting myself in a bit of more of a risk situation, right? But I do wish to get to a place now that I'm able to sort of manage the fears in a more, I would say, wholesome way, as opposed to just like avoiding it. But like you said, it's very true that we have to sometimes put parts, of our past behind to be able to move forward. And that is something that I've kind of worked on for myself very like specifically, because I didn't want whatever my past was to kind of dictate my future, my career, and things. But I was also able, and I'm still in the process of, to develop a gratitude for some parts of what was happening when I was growing up down there, because like it or not, it has truly guided my career choices, which brings me so much fulfillment, right? So I think I was able to see that there is also the other side of the coin, which for many years I couldn't see, and develop gratitude for some aspects of what had happened and how it brought me here today.
So why do you think, we're talking about, finding confidence after 40. So why is it so much harder once we hit 40 to find that confidence?
I think there's a few reasons, and I chose specifically this demographic, working with women over 40, and that is primarily the demographic that I serve, for a couple of reasons. And the first reason is that naturally, as we hit that age, there are lots of hormonal changes that starts to happen. In my case, they happen quite sooner, and it's true for some women too, others are later, but for me, we're quite sooner because of a lot of the other hormonal issues that I've had. But in general, when a woman hits around 40 and so on, a lot of hormones decline. And the first one is progesterone. And that hormone has a lot to do with us feeling like ourselves, like, anxiety or, any little thing kind of getting under your skin is one of the sort of normal descriptions that women feel as progesterone declines because it has an impact in our brains. So there's a bit of a hormonal reason why we may just feel a little uneasy and not like on our game as before. But when it comes to the mindset aspect of it, I feel that at that age, we start to hear what I call the compounding effects of modern life, which can be anywhere from higher levels of stress because of aging parents, or say you have now kids, they're like teenager years, or even just like, growing up, or some women are either switching careers or they're in the peak of their career with a lot of stressors. So I would say that there's so many more stressors to deal with. And as a consequence of the hormonal changes and the stressors, our bodies start to change. So if you were to say, your whole life you're a size 6 and you fit in your jeans and it's all good. And then around that age, some women, the words I hear often is that I feel my body's no longer under control. Like I can just now, I look at bread and I gain 2 pounds, like things like that. And I think for a lot of those combining changes that we start to really feel that there is a real shift now. And so many women don't know what to do because the weight loss industry in general isn't necessarily tailoring to those changing needs, even nutritionally changing needs, hormonally, your new needs. So I really made it my mission to cater to that specific demographic because there's so much you can do mindset wise, but also food and hormonal wise to really help offset so you can have a better experience. Because I do believe that is one of the most incredible, changes in age that we can have because we're more authentic. We're more, I don't know, like sure of ourselves. And, I just want to see the physicality kind of match everything else that we get when we get to that age group, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I think too that, around our 40s, the majority of us are done raising kids or almost done raising kids, and it's time to start looking at ourselves and
Exactly.
say, who am I now? I'm done with this part of my life, so now what? And then we start looking into the future going, oh crap, I'm getting older.
Yes.
50s pushing, or whatever, and that gets scary too.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
aging, I used to say, for years I picked up the slogan from Oil of Olay and said, I refuse to grow old gracefully. I intend to fight it every step of the way. And I said that for years, and now that I'm almost 50, I'm finally embracing the aging, and the aging
Yeah,
process, and just letting it happen naturally. And I'm not fighting it, um, other than the weight part. That's a constant struggle, but it is what it is. But I find too that also in our 40s, that's when we really get into that personal development,
yeah.
self-help phase. So I think that's where we're really starting to question who we are, and that can affect our confidence in who we are.
Absolutely. And I see a lot of times too that for the women that I talk to and that I serve, that for most of our lives, we are just living by duty, right? We are basically doing what we think we have to do, catering to others. And I think it's a bit of a female trait in a way that we're like caretakers by nature.
Yep.
But very much like you said, when the kids are raised or, like the call the duties change, right? And we have a little bit more of a void at that time. I think that's when a lot of the questioning, but what do I actually want to do? What do I actually like to do? Really can be scary because for so many women, like we never ask ourselves, what do I want? We just ask what everybody
Right.
else wants, right? And then when you combine that with the shifting hormones and you combine that with our changing bodies and the weight gain, which is very common for many reasons around that time, it becomes a little challenging because now we don't feel our best. We don't look like we used to. And now we have to decide what we want. It's almost like, it's just like this trifecta, and it takes quite a bit. And it is that transition. And even for some women, it's a little after 40 anyways. Like you said, like it could even be like mid 40s, early 50s, or even turning 50 for some women. And that is like the period in life for women that I really love. And I really feel that there's so much potential to give women a better experience of that transition, but also give them back that sense of control, of feeling confident, feeling like themselves, so that they can actually enjoy that phase, like you said, that you got to, as opposed to, resenting that phase, or,
Sure.
feeling worried and things like that.
Sure. What are a few tips that you can give our listeners on how to begin feeling confident and getting that confidence back?
Absolutely. So what I like to do first is kind of like do a little, like define a little bit how I see confidence. And then the tips will make more sense. So one of the ways that I like to describe it, I know this is audio only, so we can see my hands, but what I like to say to women is that if you can imagine a line, like if you were to look at a piece of paper, right in the middle, you just draw this line. This line is what we call your sense of self-worth. And no matter who we are, no matter our circumstances, what we went through, that self-worth is almost like a little meter, and it reads 100%. And I like to qualify it, and I tell women, just write down 100%, because nothing, and I mean nothing, can change what you're worth. You're always worth 100%. And that is true for every single one of us. What changes is our perception of that worth. So anything that's above that line, you have high self-esteem. Anything that's below that line, you have low self-esteem. So the first way that I like to tell women so if you want to, say, improve your self-esteem, all you have to do is understand, why are you below the line, right? So I'll give an example. So say you're going to go, I don't know, speak on TV on a segment about women, right? So for some women, they would be potentially afraid, because what if they don't do well? What if they mess it up or misrepresent their opinions? Why not? But if you were to give the same speech to a group of first graders, you probably wouldn't feel the same, because you would perceive that your knowledge is more than what they know about the topic, right? So confidence in that sense is ever changing. Confidence is not something that we can gain, if that makes sense. Confidence is almost like this up and down, like wave that goes from situation to situation, based on if you perceive you have more or less knowledge of the person or the circumstance, if you have more or less qualifications, more, whatever it is that you perceive you're lacking, or you have more than, that is what determines your confidence. So one of the ways that I like to talk to women in terms of improving your confidence is becoming really clear that whatever happens doesn't impact your self-worth. So it just kind of gives you that sense of, okay, this is not what's in question here. But also, what I like to tell them is, once you understand that all that is shifting here is your perception, once you know what you're comparing yourself to, that's all you need to do. Because if you know you're comparing yourself to this, version of you from 20 years ago, if you're in terms of, say, body image, if you're comparing yourself to a celebrity, whatever you're comparing yourself to, I tell women that there's nothing in you that's lacking. It just exists in a different form. So if you say are very confident speaking to your spouse or your children, but you're not confident speaking to a crowd, that doesn't mean you lack confidence in speech. You just have it in a different form when you're talking to your close loved ones and so on, versus, right? So I think the first step is to understand nothing can impact your sense of self-worth. It's only a perception if you're below or above that line in terms of high self-esteem and low self-esteem. And then the second thing that I like to tell women is that we're most authentic, we're most present, and we're most ourselves as close as we get to that self-worth line. Anytime we deviate too high from it, so very proud of yourself and full of yourself, or too low, you're guilty and hiding and ashamed, those two extremes are not your true you. Those two extremes are not your most confident self, because we are basically deviating greatly from our sense of self-worth. And that's usually when women struggle. So what I love to do with them is a simple exercise that my mentor, Dr. DeMartini, talks about it a lot, which is to take a situation. So let's just, for example, say that you would like to feel more confident in your body. Okay. So let's say you look in the mirror and you don't love what you see. The exercise essentially looks at so it's like physically writing down exercise. I got a piece of paper, line in the middle. And on the one side, you write down all the ways that having the body that you currently have is benefiting you. And on the other side, you write all of the ways that a smaller body will be benefiting you. Then below on the third quadrant, you like all the ways that the body you have is not serving you, which for most women, that's the easy quadrant. And on the final one, you write all of the ways that a smaller body would not benefit you. So what this exercise does is that it forces us, because most women are able to complete the quadrant. How does a smaller figure benefits you, and how does our current figure does not? So those are the two easy quadrants. But the important part of the exercise is the quadrants that you don't have a lot of information on. And that is a way to really push that out of your brain, like the subconscious part of your brain. Because what we want to look here is that all four quadrants have the same amount of weight and value, meaning that we're eventually, when the exercise is completed and done properly, that we are able to see very clearly the pros and cons of staying the way we are and the pros and cons of having reduced our weight in a way that it is neutral, in a way that we are closer and closer and closer to that self-worth line, as opposed to in pride, oh my gosh, look how much weight I lost, or in guilt and shame, oh my gosh, I cannot, the scale won't budge. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I like that,
Yes.
having that line there, and the above and below the line. I like that very much.
Yeah, wonderful.
Well, you have a free offer for our listeners. Can you tell us about that, and where can they find it?
Yes, absolutely. So I put together a free training very specifically on this mindset aspect of it. And I'll just tell you one quick other thing about it, because a lot of times I know for women, one of the things, even if you're not over 40, but one of the things that prevent a lot of women from putting themselves out there is the physical discomfort with their bodies. So what I decided to do is put together a training on what are those limiting beliefs that women experience in relation to this, but also what are some of the strategies that I have to overcome some of those limiting beliefs. And I actually tell exactly what it is in this training. And yes, it is a little bit more focused on the weight aspect of it, but the modality that I practice, and I loved the release aspect of your podcast name, because the modality I practice is what I call weight release. And the release is part of releasing that baggage, releasing a lot of this emotional stuff that we carry, that we associate for ourselves as a sense of self-worth with our confidence or lack thereof. So the training is really a way to break it down, all the steps in this mindset journey, but also to share with you the tools and how do I look at it to really help you shift the perspective. So at least you're clear about what are this like tango mess of mindset stuff that happens in weight loss that is just not talked about. And I also touch base on some of what are the actual strategies that should change from a nutritional dietary standpoint when we turn 40. And for some women, they don't know that some of those things are needed. Therefore, they're not necessarily eating for their best optimal health. So I put together this training to kind of cover both of those aspects and kind of clarify the whole mindset picture for you. So it can be found on my website, which is naturallyjoyous.ca/masterclass. And it's on demand. So whenever you're ready to watch it, you click on the link and you get access right away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Juliana, for
Yes.
joining us and giving us these fabulous tips and free gifts. I really
Oh,
appreciate it.
I'm very pleased. And thank you so much, Trace, for having me and for this conversation. It was wonderful.
All right. Listeners, again, that website was naturallyjoyous.ca/masterclass. We'll also have the link down below if you're watching this on the website. It'll be down below in the show notes. So you can grab your copy, your access there. So thank you as always for listening, and we'll talk to you next week on the show.